In this video, I wanted to spend some time going over this networking checklist that I've created and tell you a bit more about how to use it and about some of the specific entries on here. Now, the purpose of this checklist is to address the fact that the number one mistake people make when networking, at least in the beginning, is not considering enough sources. So you can get names and industry context from many different places, but one mistake that I've seen crop up repeatedly, not only in real life, but also when I went around conducting interviews with people who had successfully networked into the industry, was not considering enough sources in the beginning. In other words, they left some stones unturned when really you have to leave no stone unturned when you start out. Now, the way this is set up is I have this column for a name and contact source right here. Then I have some notes in the center, and these are just some additions to keep in mind, some clarification, because not everything over here on the left is immediately obvious. So these just clarify some of my thoughts on how you might use each of these different sources. And then this have you tried it category, this column. The reason why I've created this special format in Excel, yes or no, you can enter 1 for yes and 0 for no. The reason why I've created that is because I want you to use this and literally go down every single item on here and explore every single possibility until you've actually tried everything on the list. So I want you to literally go down this and check off everything until you've really explored all possibilities on here. And the way you can do that is very simple. You look at each one, and as you start networking, you change this from a 0, which is what it's at right now, to a 1. So it changes from no to yes. Okay, now to go into some of the specific items. This list is roughly arranged in order of obvious to less obvious to obscure and potentially crazy ideas at the bottom. So the obvious ones are all at the top, and these probably don't require too much in the way of explanation. So things like personal friends, alumni, career center, family friends, relatives, information sessions. These are all pretty obvious, and they're things that everyone thinks of. A couple of points to make, though. On alumni, a lot of people just go after college alumni or just go after business school alumni, but you should be thinking about not only both those, but also thinking about high school, secondary school, summer programs, live seminars, really any type of schooling you've had. If you have relatives or younger children in school or something like that, think about any way you can access alumni networks of different programs in different schools, whether it's through yourself or through friends. Career Center, typically they're useless, but sometimes the alumni database part is helpful if they offer that. And then family friends, sometimes people are reluctant to leverage these, but you have to use every single advantage you get. If something seems unfair to you, then that means you should probably be using it and leveraging it to its full extent. And then relatives. In a lot of cases, you might have, for example, an uncle or a distant cousin or something who's in accounting or law or some kind of finance related industry. It's worth contacting them and exploring that and seeing if there's any potential to get introduced or get referred to other bankers or financiers through them. With information sessions, I've covered this briefly before, but basically you want to focus on meeting as many people as possible and getting business cards. It's very, very difficult to make a good impression at an actual information session. So don't worry about that. When there's 20 people crowding around someone, it's not even worth your time to try to come across well and make a really good impression. Just introduce yourself, get their business card, and do the bulk of your work later on when you follow up and develop the relationship with the person that you met at this session. With social networks, so everyone knows Facebook and LinkedIn, and LinkedIn in particular can be a really good source for contacts, but also think about niche social networks. So anything that's specific to a geography or to an interest you have or to a certain category or a club you're in, something like that. Because the more of a niche social network it is and the fewer people have access to it, the bigger your advantage will be. Because if you can come to someone and say, hey, I found you on this social network for rock climbers or for people who like yoga, then you immediately have an advantage because chances are he's never even been contacted by anyone from that situation. So the more you think outside the box with social networks, the better off you'll be. Moving down to some of the others, so then we get into these organizations here. So fraternities, sororities, student groups, volunteer groups, military connections. With frats and sororities, usually business frats are the best ones to focus on. The others can be a little hit or miss. With student groups, obviously anything more business or finance related is good, but you can also include here things like the newspaper, student government. In a lot of cases, anyone involved in those types of activities is more inclined to go into business or finance related fields afterward. Volunteer groups. So probably the most famous example here is Teach for America, which has really strong business connections and actually specifically sets people up with internships. But there are other well-known groups across the country and across the world that also provide business connections and may provide networking opportunities with alumni. With military connections, this is a very common question I get all the time. I'm from the military. I used to be in the Navy. Do you think I can get into finance? The answer is yes, and there's actually a lot of ex-military guys in finance and business. And if you can get some kind of connection like that, just go back to whatever you served in, go back and talk to your officer or whoever else was in charge and try to get contacts like that. And again, it's the type of thing where it's not very common. So if you can actually find people this way, they're likely to be a lot more sympathetic and a lot more helpful, especially if you have a situation where not only were you in the same group or the same division, but maybe you were also in the same region. So maybe you also both served at an army base in a certain part of the world or something like that. Professors and teachers. So again, here, don't think about just business school or university. Also think about other grad schools, high schools, summer programs. Basically, any type of instruction you've ever had, any type of teacher or professor you've ever had can really be a source for contacts here. Event speakers. So I've spoken at quite a few universities and business schools, and I'm amazed that when students have someone in the room who can answer questions and possibly give them referrals, very few actually come up and ever introduce themselves or ask me much. And this always amazes me because whenever you go and do this and get their business card and then you follow up and actually ask questions and try to develop a relationship, that automatically puts you in the 0.01% of the population who actually does that. So you get a big advantage if you can do this. Business and grad school students. This is one that undergraduates overlook a lot. So let's say you're going to Wharton, for example. Obviously, one of the top business schools in the world. Well, if you're an undergraduate there, you need to be reaching out and contacting all the business school students that you can find because chances are probably, I don't know, probably 90% of them have been in some kind of business or finance related role before and they can probably help you out in some way. But it doesn't even have to be something as well known as Wharton. It can be any business school really. Don't overlook anything that's right next to you, any group of students or professionals or anything like that that's right next to you, right at your fingertips. Religious groups. This can be a bit hit or miss. Same with neighbors and even politicians. I would say with all these, this kind of what I call the local contacts here and even local business owners, these tend to work better if you're in an area with a lot of bankers. So this type of stuff would work a lot better if you're in, say, New York, Manhattan, Hong Kong, if you're in certain parts of London, for example. If you're in the middle of the country, then this isn't going to work as well because this is all regional. It depends on people knowing each other in the same region. But these are some types of people that might be very well connected. A lot of people who head up religious groups tend to be quite well connected because they know everyone in the community. Politicians, same thing. They know everyone in the community. They have to because they're politicians, so they tend to be very well connected. And then under professional services, so this one applies more if you're already working. So if you already have a certain doctor, lawyer, real estate agents, brokers, things like that, chances are they probably know other people within finance or business. You can probably get referrals from them. And don't be awkward about it. If you know a lawyer who works at a large firm and he's handling a trial or a case for you or something, just go up to him and say, hey, do you know anyone in corporate finance? Do you know anyone at your firm who handles the corporate law cases? Could they possibly get me referrals? I would be very, very forward with what you're looking for. Then we get into a few others here that are more applicable to anyone who's working right now. And clients, former clients, this one always gets overlooked by people. I know of a good friend actually who used to work in commercial banking and then got into investment banking because he networked with a client. And that's exactly how he did it. Coworkers and former coworkers, again, works really well in related fields, law, finance, accounting, things like that. Professional organizations. I've just listed a few here, such as the CFA Institute, the New York Society of Security Analysts, and there are a bunch of other finance-related organizations that I've listed here, but these exist in every region, so reach out. Even if you're not a member of these groups, just go to the meetings anyway. Just show up, introduce yourself, and be very proactive with putting yourself out there and getting to know people. Then referrals here should be obvious. Whenever you speak with anyone, you always want to get referrals. And we go over this in some of the email and calling templates included with this course. And then after that, we get into some of these methods that may not be immediately obvious to you. So Capital IQ, the trick here is just finding someone with access So find someone either on a message board or someone at business school or someone in finance who can look up banks information for you. Search by region, search by industry, limit it to banks and investment banks, for example, in a certain region. Get their contact information, start calling them. SEO and other programs like that. One thing that often gets overlooked here is that you can use these even if you're not a minority. So a lot of people incorrectly think that just because they don't have some special circumstances, they can't use these programs. But I would urge you to apply anyway because I've seen many people use these even though they didn't technically meet all the criteria. Individual banks' websites. So this is basically doing a reverse lookup, and it acknowledges the fact that many alumni choose not to be listed in public directories. And this method gets around that because what you can do is go to the bank's websites, look for alumni from your school or anyone with a shared connection, and just start contacting them. And it's true, there are many, many guys who choose not to be listed in any directory, and this is really the only way you can get to them. It is time consuming, but there are ways to get around that, which we'll get down to below. And then other schools' information sessions. So let's say that you're in the San Francisco Bay Area, but you don't go to Stanford or Berkeley. Well, you can still go to the information sessions at those schools. Just show up, introduce yourself, start going around meeting with banks, and start getting contacts and business cards that way. And I'd say with this type of strategy, again, much like actual information sessions, it's very hard to impress on the spot. What you need to do is get their business cards, follow up with them, and develop a relationship because that's what'll really set you apart. Okay, now moving on to some really unusual strategies here at the bottom. So this one, pay your assistant to do it for you. Now you might be wondering what exactly I mean by this. Well, these days you can get virtual assistants. So people working overseas and other places who will complete tasks for you for pretty cheap for the most part. On timesaver.com, for example, you can actually get someone to work part-time for you, 4 hours a day, 5 or 6 days a week for about 400, 500 US dollars per month, which for the amount of work that you can get done is very, very cheap. And maybe you're not in a position to pay for something like that right now, but let's say you're already working or you're a busy professional and you have a really busy schedule. Well, you know what? If you can pay someone $400 and get hundreds or thousands of contacts like this, I'd say it's easily worth it. So timesaver.com is a popular service for doing that gives you unlimited tasks for between $50 and $100 a month. And then elance.com is another one. Here you can actually hire people out as contractors to go and do this work for you. And there's really no limit with outsourcing here. Probably the easiest thing to do is just to tell them to find people for you, but there are many possibilities. You could tell them to actually compose emails for you. I would probably not have them make calls for you. That's probably going a bit too far because you want to make the personal connection yourself, but emails, finding contact information, there's no limit on what they can do for you. Then getting names from older students. So what I mean here is another form of outsourcing. So if you have students above you who have already networked their way into the industry, contact them, get all their information, get the actual names and email addresses of people they contacted, and use that because it immediately tells you who's helpful, who's not helpful, who they had luck with, and you have a huge leg up because you already have all this information. Now, the flaw with this one is that things can change very quickly, but it's still worth pursuing because believe it or not, some people actually do stick around for a while at different firms. So and especially if you're getting names from students who are only a year above you, it's definitely worth pursuing. And then some other ones here. So FactSet phone number lookup. So within FactSet, sometimes if you have a person's name and company, you can actually get their phone number directly. So this is great for cold calling. Again, the only issue here is getting access in the first place. Contacting finance website owners. So please don't send 500 emails to me because I honestly cannot help you too much with actually getting leads and names at this point. But there are tons of finance blogs out there, many, many different finance websites and blogs. So get out there, start contacting those people and ask if they know of anyone in the industry or can refer you to anyone. Google searches. This sounds incredibly stupid, but you'd be surprised what simply typing in firm name plus recruiter can show up. If you type in Goldman Sachs and then recruiter, you actually find the names of some of Goldman Sachs recruiting officers in the US. So it's pretty amazing. Works better for boutiques and smaller firms, but you'd be surprised what will show up with Google searches because a lot of these companies issue press releases, so everything's automatically indexed. Then some other ones here at the bottom. So the airport. If you see someone walking through the airport with a bank's bag, carrying a bank's bag, you should immediately go up to them, introduce yourself, get their business card. They will be incredibly impressed that you've actually done this. Now, I know this is not everyone's cup of tea. This might be outside your comfort zone, but I would strongly urge you to learn to become more proactive like this and start doing things like this, just approaching strangers. Because bottom line is, if you see someone walking through the airport carrying a Morgan Stanley bag, for example, you go up to them, they will remember you because hardly anyone does that. And when you're networking, it's all about standing out and being remembered. Now, you have to do it tactfully, but if you can really find a way to get remembered and to set yourself apart from everyone else, you have a really big advantage when you're networking. Now, for the next one, gym, golf course, and dentist office, this is really the law of attraction. Whenever you're in one of these places, always be telling people about what you're looking for and what you're doing. You could turn up the craziest connections by doing this type of thing. If you just meet someone in passing or waiting around talking to the secretary at one of these places, just say, oh, I'm so and so, I'm looking for internships or jobs in finance or private equity or investment banking right now. And you never know. It's always worthwhile whenever you're in a public place or you're meeting someone new, always tell them who you are, what you're doing, and what you're looking for. Because again, you just don't know what's out there. And I actually know of someone personally who managed to get an interview simply by announcing this when I think she was in the doctor's office or dentist's office or something. This is a while ago, but the point is you never know what's going to happen in that type of situation. Then the next two here, inbox and checkbook. These are related to the same issue, which is that all of us come in contact with hundreds, possibly thousands of people each year, but we hardly ever actually keep track of all the different names and everyone we come across. But if you go through your inbox, if you look at everyone you wrote out a check to over the past year, let's say, you could find some surprising connections in there. Look up anyone's name you don't know, anyone you don't immediately recognize, and just do a quick search for them on social networks, on Google, see what pops up, see what's out there. If it looks like they might be potentially finance related, it's worth following up and contacting them again, saying, hey, I know we haven't spoken in a while. This is really random, but I just wanted to reach out to you and see if you knew anyone in the industry or might be able to help me out in some way. It's unconventional and it's probably not something that you've heard of before using this strategy, but again, that's what networking is all about, coming up with these tactics that not everyone else is using because that's what's going to set you apart. Then this final one, non-finance contacts. So this is one that often goes overlooked. If you can find C-level executives at a company or business development or corporate finance guys at a normal company, chances are if it's big enough, they probably know bankers. They probably know someone in finance, someone in corporate law, and this is one that often goes overlooked by people. And these days, I would say it actually extends well beyond purely business. If you know someone in the treasury in the US or working in some kind of finance role in the government in a different country, managing any finance companies that they know own stakes in, this could be a great networking opportunity. And this is one that really goes overlooked because when most people approach networking, they just try to find people working at banks. But sometimes you actually get better luck and better results if you go to people who work in related fields and then ask for referrals. Because in a lot of cases, these guys will actually know the senior guys, the MDs, and partners at banks and other finance firms better. And if you can get an introduction to someone like that that's much higher up on the ladder, then that's going to really enhance your networking efforts. So that's it for our quick overview of how you might use this list. Now, you don't have to do every single thing I suggest on here, and in fact, there's probably way more strategies than I've even thought of for coming up with contacts and for going through and getting your initial set of industry names and contacts. But this is just a starting point. These are just some things to think about, and the whole point of this is to illustrate that even when you think you've exhausted all your contacts, chances are that's probably not the case. There's probably additional room to find new contacts, to begin networking efforts in different areas. And it's really, really important to not overlook anything, to really leave no stone unturned when you first get started with your networking efforts.